the sphere that you put around all of this, it's that family evolution and understanding that regardless of whether you like it or not, it is changing daily. And it's, you know, it's the people that have the foresight to say, hey, you know what got me here probably won't get me there. And I need to bring some people that may have been down this journey before to think through these things. And so, you know, one of my, an avid listener, doesn't happen to be on today, but their family had, you know, an enormous amount of success. Mm-hmm. And it was, you know, two brothers, you know, just did a great job in building this business. And they're now in their late 70s or 80s. But one of the things over the last 10 years that they said is they did reach out and they created, you know, an advisory board. They created a family constitution. They created a family board, a family, you know, the family advisory council, family council.
Yes.
And they did that in the first, you know, in the first generation while the second generation was learning. One of the reasons, you know, in conversations that we've had was they realized that the amount of, and it was only driven because of the amount of wealth mm-hmm. and the fear of what could happen. But the amount of foresight, like you said, typically that first generation person can't see that. So I just take my hat off and tip it to them to say, you know, good on you for having that foresight to say, I knew how to build a business. I never went to, you know, I never became a therapist or a sociologist and a psychologist to understand how do I keep my family together. Right. That's interesting.
Well, Michael, I think it makes perfect sense how this happens, because think for a moment, all of us, how non-normative, how truly unusual it is that a human being takes a dream and actually manifests it. That is taking pure energy and turning it into matter. That's actually what happens. And naturally, to do that action in a lifetime, particularly in a very large result, one becomes captured by the magnificence of that journey. And rightly so. And therefore, many other things that one might have thought about, simply, even if they are imagined, don't get into one's consciousness because one's consciousness is very full. That's why I've often said, Michael, that it's the second generation, the first rising generation, the second generation, whose principal question is family, not business. Its principal question is, how does a family emerge? And of course, that question sits fundamentally in the question of, can it make joint decisions? So when you mentioned constitutions, you mentioned councils, all of these bodies or documents are important. They're only useful, however, if the rising generation can make them work.
Right.
Which is not a question of the document or the system, it's a question of practice.
Sure.
And what often doesn't come is the manual of practice along with the document and the structure. So the second rising, that first rising generation, the second generation, not only has to figure out how to make family joint decisions. Family has to be two or more people. You can have a single person household, but you can't have a family that Webster says that isn't two or more people, which means joint decisions. So the second generation has the very complex problem of both having to learn how to practice these different systems that they inherit, boards, whatever it may be, documents. But they also have the even deeper question, can they as individual family members make decisions together. Now, not to go too far afield, but the tragedy that they need to understand, all of our listeners, is the tragedy that Roy Williams and Vic Pricer's great book, Preparing Heirs, say that 80% of families don't have a joint decision-making system or can't make it work. 70% when the second generation becomes the decision makers. Bad odds. And what are those odds reflecting? Those odds are reflecting that the practice of joint decision making wasn't in the mind of the first generation. The second generation has to find advisors who can advise them, like you, Michael. By the way, here's your problem. So you have this wonderful 3-circle model. Oh, it's spheres. Oh, it's not circles. No, it's spheres. Oh, and by the way, you have to imagine that they're dynamic. They're dynamic. It looks flat to me. No, it's a round sphere in space. It's not a flat land. Oh, God. Really? And then there's this whole big imaginary sphere around it of family and evolution. What? And by the way, the only way the spheres grow is if you make good joint decisions. But I don't like my siblings. I know you don't, but you have a choice. And by the way, your children, the grandchildren, their future depends upon whether you can learn to make this system dynamic and make good joint decisions in all 3 of the spheres and the larger sphere.
Oftentimes,